Strap in for the Fighter Pilot Podcast, the internet radio show that explores the fascinating world of air combat, the aircraft, the weapon systems, and most importantly, the people. Now, here are your hosts, retired U.S. Navy fighter pilots Vincent Aiello and Brian Sinclair.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 54 of the Fighter Pilot Podcast. Today, we're talking about an airplane, helicopter, I don't know, Sunshine, what do we call this thing?
Let's call it a transformer. I don't know, dude. Let's call it awesome.
Outstanding. Well, I am your host, Vincent Aiello, Callsign Jello. Joining me is Brian Sinclair, Sunshine. How you doing, buddy?
Doing well, man. Hey, Jello, so this past week, I know you celebrated your father's life, right, with the funeral. How did that go?
Oh, thanks for asking. Yeah, it's been a couple weeks since you and I have been on the air because we recorded both parts of the F4 and then split that up. So it's been a little while. It went really well, thank you. We laid him to rest, as I said before, in Los Angeles at the National Cemetery just off 405 next to UCLA. And all the family showed up. We had a great ceremony there with the flag folding by an Army detail and taps, which was very touching. And then we went and had a reception all afternoon and celebrated. So, yeah, it was a really good time. I appreciate you asking. And, of course, now my sister's still dealing with his estate, and that'll take some time. But we laid him to rest, and I guess it's pretty much the closure, you know?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear there was good closure. The whole family was there, so it's as good a situation as possible, right?
Yep, indeed. Well, yeah, speaking of that, like I said, it's been a couple of weeks. Now, the Top Gun Maverick trailer came out since we recorded last time. Mm-hmm. And boy, that has caused some churn, hasn't it? I ended up releasing a behind the scenes on it, and my 18-year-old son came in and he said, "Dad, name it this." And it went crazy. Did you see how many downloads it had?
Yeah, it went viral, dude. I love it. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So then I changed it back because I don't know how much detail we want to get into this, but the military liaison to Paramount was a guest on this show. And he called me up. He's like, "Hey, dude, you probably need to be careful because they don't want, in case you say anything negative and it affects ticket sales, blah, blah, blah." So anyway, we got to figure out, we got to get our heads together on how we are going to approach this upcoming show because we don't want to get in any trouble, but we do want to celebrate its release. I think it'll be hopefully a really good movie.
I think it will, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's a big investment on Paramount. And actually, I talked to a Paramount rep too, and mum is the word until about 2 weeks after the release.
Okay. Well, you especially, since as we've said before here, you've had a little more toe in the water than I have. Anyway, moving on. So, hey, we had some great feedback on our last episode, as we always do. And there's one I have to share. This is from Craig Cook.
Okay.
Now, he is a former Air Force airman who worked on munitions. And he says, quote, "Please don't ever, all caps, say bullets again when referring to an aircraft's cannon rounds. Refer to them as rounds, complete rounds, or in terms of other various components such as cartridge, case, projectile, gas rings, etc." All right, Craig, you got me on that one, but I don't know.
Well, hold on. Yeah, I totally respect you, Craig, there. But I got to say, as pilots, kind of part of our bravado, right, is to downplay things. So bullets is what we call our rounds. The boat is what we call the aircraft carrier, right? And a jet.
Yeah, that giant ship. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And we call everything a jet, even if it's a helicopter. I remember in my brief saying, "Okay, we're going to walk to the jet," and it was a helicopter, and we just kept on rolling with it. So let's just say there's a lot of generalizations. So totally get Craig's point, but, I think a lot of the pilots here do generalize.
That's true. But now, Sunshine, you and I are in the public domain in a sense. So we do want to be as accurate as possible, but we also want to accurately reflect pilots. Yep. So it's a very fine line.
I do. And I tip my hat to Craig. So thanks for that. We also had some feedback from the SR-71 episode a while ago when Brian was on the show.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is very... A very detailed correction, and I appreciate that. So thinking back to Kelly Johnson's, skunk work, project there, the A-12, the A doesn't stand for attack as in following the standard convention. It was actually it was the 12th project under the Archangel design. And so we got corrected by a listener on that. The Archangel design from the CIA, So A-12 means the 12th project of Archangel under the CIA program. So once again, thank you very much for that. Just good feedback.
Oh, okay. So I get it. In other words, I was thinking A, attack, B, bomber, C, cargo kind of thing. But in this case, it's the Archangel, and they went through, 10 or 11 drawings before they finally settled on what we know as the Blackbird?
Yeah, or at least 10 or 11 projects before that, is named Archangel. Ooh. So you got it exactly right. Yeah. So right. Great feedback. So the CIA the CIA naming does not follow the traditional Navy Air Force convention. There you go, for designations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we like to learn things here, and the listeners keep us on our toes. So, as always, thanks for that.
Absolutely.
All right, in other announcements, our Patreon page has undergone a significant restructuring, as we alluded to in a couple episodes last month. So I invite everyone to head on over and check it out. And without going into too much detail, we consolidated some tiers. We've offered some new perks, and we changed a bunch of pictures and the format and what it looks like. We're still working on an intro video. I need to get that hashed out and put on there, but I think it's a real success so far. People are particularly excited about the new level that we have that will offer some perks for our DCS folks in the crowd, including access to our new server, as well as some exclusive articles that I've written in the past. And maybe we can get you to pen a couple as well, and we'll put those on there a little bit more in depth than what you get on our musings page now. So go check that out, particularly if you enjoy exclusive content, and it also helps support the show.
And thank you once again for all of your contributions, all of our Patreons, we'll call them.
For sure. All right, Sunshine, well, let's get to some listener questions. We have time, I think, this week, and if we don't, they tend to build up. So we've got 2 emails and 2 phone calls, and if it's all right with you, I'm going to hit you with an email first.
Perfect. Go for it.
All right, this is from Cam Nichols. He's a Patreon supporter, so he enjoys head-of-line privileges with his questions. He says, fuel considerations aside, what rules and regulations do you typically have to follow in relation to supersonic flight? I assume they were mostly around population density and air traffic, and that it wasn't just a free-for-all. And I think it's worth mentioning here, Sunshine, that I assume he means in training. I think in combat, all bets are off.
Yeah, great point. In combat, all bets are off. And ideally, we're not performing combat over the continental United States. So, hey, Cam, thank you very much for your question. Totally with you. Understand what you're saying. And there are very strict Federal Aviation Administration FAA rules on supersonic overflight the continental United States. So because of noise abatement, as you can imagine, so as you go trans to supersonic, you generate those shock waves. The shock waves can propagate all the way to the ground. That pressure difference that they create can actually blow windows out, right, if it's real extreme. So it is a big deal. And the rule of thumb, we'll say, in the continental United States is no supersonic flight. Now, there are some exceptions. For me, specifically, it was over Edwards Air Force Base. We have high-altitude supersonic corridors. They're up high enough that the shockwave, as it propagates back to the ground, will cause thumping, and sometimes it would be in the afternoon when the kids are sleeping and you get their naps. So my wife got a little annoyed at that, but it wouldn't break any windows. So, and also there's another rule that so many miles off the coast, it's okay to go supersonic. And the idea is you want to try not to point the jet at population centers, because if you point the jet at population centers, then those shockwaves can propagate to the land and kind of make landfall, I should say. And that's where you can have an issue. And Jello, how about you? Do you have any experience with supersonic corridors?
Well, I have a friend who on his retirement flight knew that if he was far enough off the coast and pointed at the audience, he could let us know that he was coming home soon. But anyway,
moving on.
We talked about that
we did.
Before on the show. Now, to your point, overland, usually if it's very desolate, like the desert around Edwards. I've used that airspace, by the way, on post-maintenance check flights where we have to do a mock run.
Yeah.
And then up in Fallon, there is a part of the Fallon Range Complex that is mostly away from anything, maybe onesie-twosie farmers and ranchers. But we are allowed supersonic, I believe, above 11,000 feet up to the top of the airspace. And the idea was that in there you could do the tactical training that you do require, and so at times you would fly supersonic. But for the most part, I mean, you really don't think about it. I remember I took someone, I forget who it was, it might have been like a Hilo guy or somebody for a ride, and I kind of made fun. I was like, all right, we're going to go supersonic. You ready? He goes, yeah. I said, okay, watch this number in the HUD and the repeater on your DVI.
Yay,
0.98, 0.99, 1.0, 1.01, and he goes, that's it? So, that's it. It's not that exciting for us.
No,
so.
You know what? Actually, mea culpa here. One time I was over a non-supersonic area, or in a non-supersonic area. It was a slick Rhino, and I actually set in the blowers, and then, I set it to mill, and then I look down to take some notes. And as I'm scribbling, I look up in the heads-up display there, and I see 1.01. And it was China Lake. It was just east of China Lake, near that accident, unfortunately, and up at altitude. But if we do violate, i.e. go supersonic in a non-supersonic area, there's actually a report, right, that the Navy makes us fill out. And it's just going to be a time, lat long, if you will, so position and an altitude. And that way they have it on file just in case anybody calls with noise complaints.
That's right. And speaking of that, we didn't really talk about it in the announcements, but I think everybody is aware who follows this that the Navy community lost a lieutenant from Lemoore recently in Star Wars Canyon. And our friends at the Wingman Foundation have responded to that, and we're trying to help promote that as best we can. So, yeah, tragic times. That came on the Wednesday, Sunshine, of the Friday that I was laying my father to rest. Oh. And on Sunday, my wife's very good friend who's been battling cancer for years finally succumbed. So it's been a rough few days.
Yeah, no
for
kidding,
us,
dude.
But
no
I
kidding.
didn't know the kid Walker, I think it was his last name, from Lemoore. Did you happen to know?
Yeah, no, I trained him once, so I've I interacted with him just with my current job. So I know him. Yeah, okay. I knew him casually, and just a great American, as most of them are, you know. So a sad day.
Yep.
He left behind a wife. He survived by a wife. So yeah.
Okay. That stinks.
All right.
Well, how do we move on and try to keep this upbeat?
Yeah,
so
sure
let's
thing.
take a phone call.
Let's take a phone call.
Hello, my name's Joshua Altman. I'm out of Williamstown, Kentucky. I'm a former aviation machinist mate. I served from 2004 to 2008. I just wanted to ask the question, because of what's going on with Iran and the Straits of Hormuz, would you say that an aircraft carrier is becoming obsolete in the modern age of military and warfare? What I'm trying to get at is, like, when I was in the Persian Gulf on the Truman, I used to see it when I was on the flight deck, the little speedboats and stuff. Like, they could do swarm tactics, just swarm us with as many missiles as possible and possibly take that aircraft carrier out. I just wanted your opinion on this. I know we have the best Navy in the world. I'm not questioning that. It's just, I want to know from a realistic standpoint, just looking at for what it is, are they starting to lag behind on times? I appreciate it. The podcast is awesome. Thank you very much. Bye.
All right. Thank you, Joshua. I think this is a valid question, but Sunshine, I think they've been asking this since aircraft carriers came into existence.
I agree.
And I don't mean to say we don't have to answer it for that reason, but no, I don't think the age of the aircraft carrier is over. I would say it is still 4.5 acres of American sovereignty that you can put off the coast of anywhere. And it has the ability to launch and recover fixed and rotary wing aircraft and fly in international airspace and strike targets from a long range. And so the fact that there are threats to the carrier is nothing new. In fact, I would argue the swarm tactic of many small boats with ordnance is relatively caveman. I mean, it's the sea-skimming supersonic cruise missiles that are the real issue. So I don't think just because of the threat that you mentioned, Joshua, that the carrier is obsolete. I think it's still a very viable and important weapon in the American arsenal.
Yeah, great point, Jello. It's definitely still very relevant when it comes to power projection, but just like you mentioned earlier, the vulnerability. So specifically in that strategic bottleneck that we call the Strait of Hormuz, right? And the Strait of Hormuz, for the folks that need a little brushing up on their geography, is going to be at the base of the Persian Gulf, right? Where to the north side of it will be Iran, to the south side of it will be the UAE and Oman. And at its most narrow point, it's only 21 miles wide, and the navigable water through there is only like 2 miles wide in each direction or something. So there is a bottleneck, if you will, through there. So the carrier has to travel through that area, and that's where they talk about the swarm tactics and whatnot. But most importantly, and you kind of touched on it earlier, Jello, is that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, they're responsible for projecting Iran's presence and kind of interest in the Persian Gulf and specifically the Strait of Hormuz there. And they do have those C-802s that you talked about earlier, those subsonic cruise missiles, right? They were bought by the Chinese and reverse engineered, so now the Iranians make their own. I think they call them the Qatar. So it's still a very relevant piece of gear, the carrier, but it is very vulnerable, and it's somewhat the defense is going to be just backed up by strategic implications, right? So if Iran sinks a carrier, there's going to be quite a price to pay.
Oh, yeah. No doubt about that. And I would argue almost any weapon system has vulnerability. Certainly a Mark I Motto soldier does. Tanks even have vulnerability, so it just comes with the territory, I would say.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah, very good question. Then we'll move on to, do you want to do Austin's question next?
Yeah, let me put that one to you. How about this?
Okay.
Is Austin Wright. He's from Boise, Idaho. He says, how do you plan what ordnance to take for a routine close air support mission overseas? For example, where you don't quite know what you'll be tasked with. Are you provided with a variety of solutions just in case you need to adapt to a certain scenario? Example, carrying a JDAM, a full gun, and maybe a laser Maverick. So I don't know about you, Sunshine, but this is what we used to do all the time, patrolling over Iraq and Afghanistan, although I personally never flew over Afghanistan. But I don't know. What do you think about Austin's question here?
Yeah, so Austin, thank you very much for the question and listening. And honestly, I love Boise. So I got some relatives up there in Nampa, which is close by.
Wow,
so
very good.
yeah, Nampa, Meridian, Boise, all love that area. But I digress. So anyway, yeah, I've flown over Iraq and Afghanistan, and we had something called a standard conventional loadout, an SCL. And that was going to be kind of the Mark 1 Mod 0 loadout for each of the Hornets as they go in, specifically for XCAS or CAS on call, we'll call it. And I traditionally carried the AGM 65 Echo laser, with the laser guided one. I had a GBU 38, the 500-pound JDAM, the GBU 12, the 500-pound paveway or laser guided bomb, and then a nose full of bullets. And that predominantly was dictated on the target sets. So what I mean by that is what things do we probably or possibly need to blow up in country? And we would use our JMEMs, which is the Joint Munitions Effectiveness Manual, and the targeteers and all their training. They would figure out the target sets, figure out what weapons were needed to destroy to a certain level the targets, and then they would basically use those weapons as one of the factors. They'd also look at the inventory. So make sure the carrier has enough of certain types of weapons in the magazine, and then they would make sure, they'd use those stores, obviously, on the aircraft themselves. Another thing was environmental. So the reason you have a laser-guided bomb as well as a JDAM, well, in the Persian Gulf, you can have sandstorms, and you can have different ways that would basically obscure the conditions visually, and that would inhibit the laser use, and that way you could use the JDAM if need be. So there's kind of a flexibility both on environmentals and on target sets. And then also the targeteers, I failed to mention earlier, they look at the JMEMs, they're going to look at their training on how to blow things up. Collateral damage, that is a huge thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so collateral damage estimates are going to be huge when it comes into rules of engagement or ROE, or the bigger picture, they call it the law of armed conflict, right, LOAC. So those factors, if you will, collateral damage estimates, environmentals, carrier inventory, what's available, and also the target sets, I think played big factors into selection of the standard conventional loadout. Jello, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I would add is that you have to also decide what is the likelihood of employing these weapons, because if you don't, then there's the bring back consideration. So you and your Rhino can bring back more than I can in my Hornet, and so we will load differently in that regard because you have to have so much fuel. We've talked about that before on the show.
Yeah, that's a huge point.
Yeah, the only thing I want to point out, and I don't mean to point out something that you said that I think is wrong, but just the way that you said something, I just want to make sure, because you said I would normally carry, and so it's not necessarily pilot preference, right?
Oh, no, that's a great point.
It's more of like a squadron standard?
Yeah, or an air wing standard. My apologies. And and it's probably going to be a theater standard, right? So anytime a carrier comes into the AOR or the air wing comes into the area of responsibility, they're going to be issued probably an SCL, standard conventional loadout, based on those factors and lessons learned. Yeah, good call.
Yep. All right. Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to point out a flaw, just in case someone interpreted it.
No, I'm totally with you, dude.
All right.
You want to roll into the phone call next from Jordan?
Sure. How about one more phone call? We'll wrap up the Q&A session.
Cool.
Hey, Jello. My name is Jordan. I'm calling from Marion, Kentucky, on the western side of the state. My great-grandfather happened to serve in the United States Army Air Force during World War II, and after the war became a colonel with a transport wing as a reservist. I was wondering if you could talk about some of the World War II aircraft and the early Cold War aircraft that he may or may not have served on. Thanks.
All right, Jordan. Well, ask and you shall receive, because if you are listening to this episode on release day, which is Monday, August 12th, well, it's very possible that right now at this very moment, I am recording an episode on the B-17. And so we have that in the hopper. We're going to save it with the B-52 and a couple others for Bomber Month. It's like Shark Week, only better. And I have a friend at my airline. That's right. I have a friend at my airline who flies P-51s, whose dad was a Tuskegee Airman.
No kidding.
And so Yeah. He takes them around to air shows.
Oh, dude.
And so I'm hoping to get him on the show. And absolutely, anyone we could find who flew or flies any aircraft through the ages, well, we're going to be looking for them, because there's a lot of great aircraft out there. And the good news is, Sunshine, that'll keep us in business for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks for the great questions. Keep them coming. And there will be information at the end from our buddy Clint Bell and our bumper announcements on how to submit your questions. But Sunshine, I think for the sake of time, we better jump right into this interview with Sweet Pea.
Great idea, man. I'm excited. So the aircraft here, and can I geek out for just a second, Jello?
Absolutely.
So yeah, we love our pointy things that go fast. That's sexy and all. I actually absolutely love this aircraft. I'm jealous of the pilots that got to fly it. I only flew the sim. But the whole tilt-rotor thing, just, because this whole VTOL, right, vertical takeoff landing thing, started back just at the end of World War II with the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, right? And then eventually, back in 1958, the U.S. Air Force actually had their first XV-3, they called it. So this concept goes way back, but you never really saw it didn't come to fruition for the tilt-rotor stuff, right, until now. So I'm just excited for the interview.
Oh, good. Well, Sweet Pea is the man to tell us all about it. Let's let him take it from here. Today on the Fighter Pilot Podcast, we're going to talk the V-22 Osprey in all its variants. And here to help us do that is Major Josh Smith of the United States Marine Corps. Callsign Sweet Pea. How are you, dude?
Hey, I'm great. It's great to be here, Vince. Awesome to be on the show.
Excellent. Well, I should say right up front, you are a trooper for putting up with me. We started this process, about a year ago? And we came close to having interviews a few times. I canceled on you last time because my wife had some meeting for me to go to. And then this week we messed up a date I did. And so anyway, we're finally here.
Here we are.
Well, thanks very much. All right, bud. Well, before we talk about the Osprey, which is just one of many aircraft you've flown, as I've heard so far, why don't you tell everybody else about all the aircraft you've flown? Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? What have you done up till now, and what are you doing now?
Okay, well, very cool. My background, grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, went to the University of Utah.
Okay.
Naval ROTC, Marine Corps side there, got my commission that way. Came in wanting to fly aircraft. That was what I wanted to do in the military. Didn't know where that was going to lead me, but the Marine Corps seemed really cool. And in high school, I went that direction. I got that scholarship to go to school. So fast forward, the basic school, find out, hey, we got you a seat down at flight school. Get down to Pensacola. And, what do you know? Hurricane Ivan had just hit.
Oh.
So Pensacola was smashed. A very vivid memory was driving over the bridge to NAS Pensacola down there, and there is this giant sailboat on the road.
Oh, gosh.
And just the base was destroyed. But anyway, it was a couple of years of a lot of fun between Pensacola, Corpus Christi, back to Whiting Field to learn helicopters, and my initial aircraft that I was selected for was the CH-46.
Okay.
For those listeners that don't know, it's a big helicopter, looks kind of like a Chinook with two rotors. And was that my first choice? Well, it wasn't really, but...
You're reading my mind over here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm taking you down that road. So I get selected for helicopters because it was just, hey, I remember vividly finishing primary in Corpus. And in comes the CO, who was a Navy CO at VT-28.
Okay.
And he says, hey, if you're a Marine, congratulations, you got helicopters, because you all got it.
Oh, wow.
And then he proceeded to tell the Navy guys how they broke out. But that's how it goes sometimes with selection.
Needs of the Navy, in this case, needs of the Marine Corps.
That's right. So I end up at Whiting Field, and the CO, I was in HT-8. HT-18 had the Marine commander. And he's telling me, hey, you got good grades. Where do you want to go? You want to go fly Cobras? You want to go do, this, that, and the other? I said, well, honestly, sir, just community-wise, I want to go fly something with wheels, because wheels compared to skids in Marine Corps rotor wing aviation are very different communities.
Really?
So skids are attacks, wheels are assault support.
Okay.
And I wanted wheels West Coast.
Okay.
And he said, oh, I totally understand, because he was a frog pilot himself.
That's the CH-46.
CH-46,
okay.
That's right. So he totally understood that, and he went to bat for me, got me what I wanted, which was 46 Squadron at Miramar. Phenomenal. Right. And that started it all off. So came out to Camp Pendleton for training on the CH-46 at HMMT 164, the Night Riders. That's the training squadron. Then into HMM 165 was my first squadron. I spent 6 years in that squadron as a junior officer. Phenomenal. 2 deployments on the MEU, Marine Expeditionary Unit, as a 46 driver, and then got the opportunity to transition with my squadron as it converted from 46 to V-22.
Oh.
And we did that in 2011.
Okay.
And so I've been a V-22 pilot since then, and spent a couple of years in VMM 166, which is the squadron next door. Did another MEU deployment with them. From there, decided I had this desire for a long time to go and fly with HMX-1.
All right, and tell us who HMX-1 is.
Okay, and that is the Presidential Helicopter Squadron.
Wow.
So for all listeners, whenever you see the president getting on that helicopter on the White House lawn, getting off at Andrews Air Force Base, or getting off that
wherever he's going,
wherever he is in the world, those aircraft are operated by HMX-1, which is the first helicopter squadron in the Marine Corps, founded back in the 1940s. And they have a really cool history that we can get into. But I had a desire because I had flown with some pilots who had done that previously, and they made it sound so cool. Back in the Bush days of GW and going to the ranch in Texas. So I had that itch, and I was fortunate enough to be selected. It's a board selection to get out there. And I was in the 3rd ever class of guys that flew Ospreys to go there.
Okay.
So we finally made a full ready room of Osprey guys. So I was there 2015 to 18, and then just last year came back out to Miramar for another stint here, and I'm with VMM 764, which is a reserve squadron.
Okay.
I converted over to active reserve, so I'm full-time support currently.
So it's like being active duty, but you belong to a different pot of money, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
I work every day, and I'm the maintenance officer currently at that squadron.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. And just starting at the beginning, so Utah, I think of Salt Lake City as an Air Force town. San Diego's a Navy town.
Big time.
But so that didn't call you at all, huh? You decided to go Marine Corps?
Well, it did. I think I had all options open, was trying to get into the academies, and I actually did get into the Naval Academy.
Really?
Got an appointment and everything.
Oh, wow.
From both my senator and Congress.
Good for you.
When
okay.
I was a young man, I was going after this military thing. It didn't really matter. But I had met some Marines, recruiters and whatnot, and I had found out that I couldn't go to the Naval Academy right away because I had some oral surgery that required some braces when I was a senior, very late in the game to get that. And the Naval Academy said, well, you can't come with that.
Really? Okay.
You got to wait a year. And I don't want to burn a year.
Sure.
So I went after, I was concurrently going after the NRTC scholarship. So I get the scholarship, and, the Marines had just intrigued me. So I started talking to them because the approach was different. And it's funny because I look back at it now, and I look at young Marines who are given that pitch that they would give back then, and like, what's important to you? What are these qualities they put out there? And I was like, this is really cool because I just talked to these Navy guys. They want me to be on a submarine. They're like, you're smart. Go be on a submarine. I'm like, I don't want to be in a submarine. I want to go aviation. But they kept pushing the submarine thing, so I said goodbye. And the Marines, of course, like, well, what do you want to do? We're going to facilitate that.
Excellent.
So anyway, I end up going the Marine Corps way, and it's been a phenomenal ride. But it's not typical.
No, well, the Marines attract a certain type of person. I have the utmost respect for Marines. I was a signature away if they'd had me, and it sounded like they would, but I didn't feel like I was a Marine in training. So I said thanks, but no thanks, and I ended up finding my own path, and I don't want to make it about me. But at any rate, all right, so you did that. Dude, I have to ask you about the Night Riders. Did you have pictures of David Hasselhoff around the squadron?
David Hasselhoff. So, yeah, they have... you can certainly look it up online for VMM 164, but they have some cool tail art on the aircraft.
Okay.
I mean, like the Grim Reaper type.
I think I have seen
stuff.
those.
It's pretty neat what they've got up there.
And then finally, for your HMX-1 days, I have to ask, did you ever get to assume the call sign Marine 1?
So, as an Osprey pilot, you don't really get to do that because the president doesn't fly the Osprey, but I was Marine 2. The Vice President Pence, got to fly him in Texas just after Hurricane Harvey when he and a delegation came down to assess the damage. That was a pretty neat experience. I have a selfie with the VP.
Excellent.
In the cockpit.
All right. He just drove down our street in Coronado the other day. He was coming on the base for something. They made us move all our cars off the one side of the street. I was somewhere else, but all right, cool. All right, buddy. Well, how many hours do you have in the V-22 now?
I have about 1,600 hours in the V-22. I had about 1,000 in the CH-46.
Okay.
And then, flight school training as
Good.
well.
My neighbor, by the way, is a retired 46 pilot. So I've always told him, hey, we need to get you on the show. And he says, just say when. So
good man.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Perfect. Well, let's start at the top. I don't know if you listen to the show, but I sent you the bullets so you know what's coming first. Yeah. Tell us why the V-22 exists. What was it designed to do?
Well, it's an interesting concept, and it starts, I won't give the full length, but just the Reader's Digest. Back in the 1950s and 60s, the Navy, the Air Force, everyone was interested in this thing of how can we make an airplane that doesn't need a runway, that can land, take off vertically, and can go fast.
Right. So we want the best skills or qualities of an airplane and the best capabilities of a helicopter.
And you can watch documentaries, the old black and white footage of these crazy contraptions crashing and all this kind of stuff. And it's just insane, some of the ideas they came up with, these vertical jets that would land and all that. Mm-hmm. And out of that era, the only thing that really survived was you get into the late 70s is the Harrier jet, right? The jump jet. And it's obviously been a really good design that's worked well, but it's a very unique aircraft that has some challenges. The V-22 actually came in to being, coming out of that era. In the late 1970s, we had the hostage crisis in Iran.
Right.
And you remember how there was an attempt at a rescue that was a big disaster in trying to get all those folks out that had been in the embassy. And coming off of that, some people got together like, we should try this again. We've moved forward in technology. They're into the early 1980s, and they started some tilt-rotor technology with there was a VX-15 or something. There's a prototype that's out at the Dulles, the museum out at Dulles Airport in D.C. that's part of the Air and Space Museum. And you can see kind of some of the concepts they were coming up with. Well, they had all kinds of trouble with that too. Fast forward, we get into the late 80s, early 90s, and they finally figured out computer technology has come up that we can make this thing work because we need stabilization systems and all kinds of different software.
Sure.
And it just wasn't available earlier on because we're talking about doing something that is truly revolutionary.
Right.
So it took about to the mid-90s before software and computers got to the point where we could make this thing work. And so we just celebrated the 30th anniversary of the first Osprey. Right? Wow. Amazing, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. But then we didn't have the first deployment until 2007.
Wow.
So it's been quite a stretch, right? It was 12 years ago that the first deployment happened. Anyway, that aircraft kind of went through all these different revisions. The program was canceled.
Right.
And then it was reinstated. And we really figured out what was needed for training of pilots, software to make this whole thing work and make it what it is today. And the future looks bright, too.
Good, for sure. The development process, as I recall, looked a little bit painful. There were some mishaps.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
It was cutting-edge technology. I mean, like you said, nobody had tried to do this. So I still think of it as a new airplane. I had no idea that it's been out for 30 years, for heaven's sakes. And so I struggle on this show, by the way, right? We have an aircraft, which could be anything, and then you have an airplane, which is like a fixed wing, and a helicopter, I believe, are the two subsets, right? What do we call this thing? Is it an airplane? Is it a helicopter? Is it an aircraft? What is it?
Well, that is a great question, Jello, because so the FAA calls us powered lift,
all right,
which is a category in and of itself. So there's airplane category with thousands of different kinds of airplanes, multi-engine, whatever. There's rotorcraft, which has gyroplanes, helicopters. That's a category. And then there's this other category over here. And I know there's more categories than that, but there is this category that stands alone called powered lift that only has 3 aircraft in it.
All right.
And it has the Harrier, the Osprey, and the F-35B, but only the B, not the A or the C, just the vertical takeoff.
All right.
And so that's what the FA calls. We call it tilt-rotor.
All right.
And so tilt-rotor kind of encompasses this idea that we can take off vertically, we can do some helicopter-type stuff, but we can also move our rotor system forward, and we call our rotors prop rotors because they're a prop and a rotor. And we can use our wing because we have a fixed wing between those two that allows us to operate as an airplane for most of the time. And typical flight, 90+% of the time you're an airplane.
Right. Okay. But you cannot land like a traditional airplane because you'll bang your blades off the
it's a little bit of a hybrid. So essentially, you can land anywhere from 0 knots up to our landing gear limit of 88 knots.
Okay.
So you can land pretty fast. You can do a roll-on landing, which obviously if you're heavy, using that wing is better, and you can use the length of a runway. Same thing for takeoff, but you're always going to be tilted, not all the way down at 0 nacelle, which would be nacelles all the way down and looking like an airplane. And you certainly don't have to be at 90 like a helicopter, but you're going to be in between those two. So for takeoff, we might be at 60.
And usually this comes up later, but since it's on our minds now, as far as flying the tilt rotor goes, do you manually control where it's pointing, or is that a result based on something else that you're inputting?
Well, that's actually a great question, Joe, because most of the time it's manual. So I have full authority to put it where I want to put it. However, because it is a fly-by-wire aircraft and it does have flight control systems and mission computers that are monitoring what you're doing, the airplane will not let you break it. So
I call that fly-by-vote instead of fly-by-wire.
That's exactly right. And you're familiar with that in that we have input, but if we're doing something that it doesn't want us to do, it will override in some cases. So where that comes into play is speed. So I can't suddenly become a helicopter if I'm doing over 200 knots. It just won't let me do that.
Okay.
But as I slow down, I can bring the rotor system up so that aerodynamic forces don't break the airplane.
And I think anyone who drives a car is familiar with this. I mean, if you took a 1960 Corvette, it's a car. You drive it, and what you do is what you get. Now you take a 2019 Corvette, and you've got anti-lock and over and understeer protection and God knows what else. I can't even keep up with it all, but you can do what you want and you can get yourself in some trouble, but for the most part, cars these days will save you from buffoonery driving. So it sounds like the same thing. All right, so let's get back to what it was designed to do. So essentially, it fills a need, if you will, between, let's say, the CH-46 and the C-130 of hauling things and people and whatever the Marine Corps needs, and it can do it vertically, and it can also go fast once it needs to, and so logistics, essentially, cargo.
That's right, and Marines. So Marine Corps, we call that assault support.
Okay.
And that's moving people and stuff, so cargo around the battle space. And so everything from hard-hit type raids where we're taking a battalion, company of Marines and putting them into a zone where they're going to go off immediately and start shooting things, kicking doors in. That's what we do.
Okay.
That is the focus of what we do, is supporting the infantry units out there. And that's in our DNA as Marines to do that. And as assault support, it's all about supporting them.
Okay.
And so with that mission comes a couple of other missions. So we put the Marines into an LZ and they're going to go do some fighting. Well, we got to get them out of there too.
Right.
So things like emergency extract, CASEVAC, getting our casualties home. And so we will dedicate assets to do that. In addition, resupply. So we got to move cargo around. We got to get them water. We got to get them chow. We got to move parts around for trucks and different things. And we even have things like there are vehicles that will move. I've flown ATVs. We have this expeditionary fighting vehicle that we can put in the back, which is a mobile artillery system with a 120 millimeter mortar.
Dang, that's
system.
big.
Yeah, and so I've flown those. You can do para-ops with the aircraft, so we could put Marines in that way. Certainly done a bunch of that. We can drop battlefield illumination out of it. So it really has become this multi-role aircraft, which a lot of helicopters are that way. And the C-130 is that way too. Where we really excel is that long-range distance of doing this stuff, and certainly ship to shore or ship to ship. And from my deployments on various ships over the 3 MUs that I've done, what we have found is that the appetite for that becomes insatiable, both from the Marine side and the Navy side, because we're working with an ARG and an amphibious readiness group, and they may want a part. And on the Gator Navy, you don't have a COD. You don't have this C2 that you can fly over to the carrier and get something and come back. You don't have that, but you have Ospreys now. So, hey, the carrier's 300 miles away, and we need this part. So they're not going to send the helicopter, take them a couple hours to get there and send us. We go over and get it and come back. And that we certainly excel at that. And then taking Marines from the ship to the shore, you've just expanded that range and that battle space tremendously. And
speed, if you need to get there quickly.
Absolutely.
Okay, so based on all that, and of course the listener can't see the light on your face, but it looks like the assault mission is the answer to my next question. But of all those different things, is there something that's really just bread and butter for this thing as far as either efficiency or efficacy or lethality or anything else? I mean, what is it really good at? Or is it good at all of them?
Well, certainly it has things that it's good at, and and other things that's not as good at. I think when you start talking about things like sling load, which we can do,
that's carrying something under the tilt-rotor.
That's correct. So we've got 2 cargo hooks, and we can pick up a heavy load, 10,000-pound load on those, and then take them and drop them somewhere. So something you couldn't load inside the interior of the aircraft. However, although we can do that, CH-53 is just better equipped to do that. And again, the 46 was well equipped to do that. But where we really excel is getting those Marines into zone, and that's what we train for. We train. I was out flying last night. We were discussing that, and I was training a new pilot, a young guy who just got into his first squadron. And what was the night all about? It was hitting this waypoint that we had put out in the desert and just hitting it on the same heading and the same distance from that point every single time in formation. So and that's what we train a lot to. We want to be able to put the Marines on time, on target, wherever they need to go so they can go do their job.
Okay. So if this was a young baseball player, hey, dude, this is going to be a fastball. In other words, you just wanted him to get that one skill because someday he may be required to land at a LZ at a certain time with a certain heading, and that's important so that you guys are just developing those skills.
That's
part
right.
task training.
That's absolutely right.
Okay.
And it won't just be in an LZ at night, low light with no moon. It will also be coming home to the ship on that pitching deck with no moon in the Persian Gulf. And you just can't see anything. But you want that muscle memory to be so good that those Marines, that they're probably sleeping in the back when you're bringing them out of the field at this point because they're so tired, that they wake up when the wheels touch down on the deck and you just had a successful mission.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, let's talk through the variants. And a lot of aircraft that I have the privilege of interviewing folks on, I know some of these. I'll be honest, the alphabet soup with the V-22 confuses me. So I know there's a C, there's an M, and these are all prefixes. I don't know about A's or B's on the end. And now there's about to be, I think, a CMV. So let's, however you want to go through it, but I'm going to take notes because I really don't know.
Okay. Well, this is a great topic. So the introduction to this is the Marine Corps obviously has the lion's share of the V-22s that exist out there. We purchased something like 300 airframes, close to that, and we're still taking delivery of them. The production line's still open. Our variant is called the MV-22 Bravo. All V-22s are Bravos.
Okay, so with the A's, the prototype, the early models.
A was a prototype from the 1990s.
Okay.
So everything coming off the production line is a B a model, and ours are MV, and that's the Marine.
And M is just multi-mission.
Yeah.
Which, based on what you just said, is what you guys are doing.
That's right. And so we have that, and we have certain things in ours that are just specific that the Marine Corps bought. Pretty much a standard model off the lot. Now, the Air Force does fly the V-22 as well. Theirs is called the CV-22, and it's a B model as well. But they have a totally different mission. So they belong to AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations Command.
Okay.
And they support special operations. So they're moving SEALs. They're moving all those spec ops units from the Army, Navy, Air Force, and even the Marine Corps sometimes. So they have a very specific mission, and the Air Force only bought less than 50 airframes. So they have a small fleet, and they do a very specific thing. If you take a look at them, they have a little bit cooler paint job, I think, than ours. They have kind of that darker paint on the top and a little bit lighter on the bottom. A few things that they have that we don't have is they have a terrain following radar built into theirs, so that they can really get down on the deck and couple up to that, and just the aircraft will go.
Sure.
They have a little bit more gas in their fuel tanks. They have an extra fuel tank in there, which supports their long-range missions that they do for AFSOC. Certainly, all models have a refueling probe, so we can go up and take gas using the V-22 is the male. That's the Navy system,
right?
And you're marrying that up with a hose and a basket from a C-130. So
probe and drogue, we call it.
That's right, the drogue. So they all have that, and then the Navy has just purchased them, and their model they're going to call the CMV-22. I'm not sure why they went with the CMV. They added more letters.
That's right.
But the V-22 in the Navy, soon to come, they're going to take delivery next year of their aircraft, begin taking delivery, and their aircraft are going to be called a VOD, so vertical onboard delivery.
Instead of a COD, carrier onboard delivery.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's a neat thing. So it's going to replace the C2 in a lot of ways. And I know there's skeptics out there, but it will certainly bring some capabilities that the COD doesn't have.
Right.
And they'll lose some capability that the COD did have in terms of range, and because it's not a true airplane. But I think the Navy's getting a big win because the V-22 will have the ability to go to the carrier.
Right.
It'll also have the ability to go to other amphibs and other air-capable ships. So you'll be able to go to the LHD or the LPD as well as the carrier and base out of runways in, say, Bahrain and theater and do that logistics mission. And we can do it quite well.
Okay. So. Now, could you jump in a CV-22 and go fly it, or is it a different qualification?
No, absolutely. I absolutely could. Okay. So we do have an exchange program with the Air Force where we only have one Marine down there, but every 2 years a Marine gets to go down and be an exchange pilot with the Air Force. That's a pretty cool thing that they get to do.
Good.
The airframes themselves, between the three, whether you're talking CV with the Air Force, MV with the Marines, or CMV with the Navy, are 99.5% compatible.
Gotcha.
With very, I mentioned the terrain following radar, the difference in the fuel tanks, but as far as software goes,
handling emergencies,
everything would be would be pretty much the same.
And does the Air Force train their own, or do they come train at the Marine Squadron?
Oh, that's what's really cool is that it's all joint right now. So the Marine Corps owns the RAG, if you will, or FRS, Fleet Replacement Squadron. That's at New River, MCAS New River in North Carolina, and everybody goes there.
Okay.
So you get your first touches of the airplane at MCAS New River in North Carolina, and we had Air Force instructors there, Air Force students there, Marine instructors, Marine students, and now they have Navy instructors and students. And I wanted to mention that Japan bought V-22s as well. So the Japanese were going through 204, VMMT 204 at New River as well. So it's this little melting pot there. And then, of course, the Air Force guys come out to New Mexico, and they finish their training in New Mexico.
Okay. Yeah. Well, they have their specialized stuff. Interesting. Who else is buying it or has bought it or operates the Osprey?
Well, so far, no one else has made a purchase, although I think there were some agreements on one of my deployments. We were tasked
to go show it off,
to take it to the Dubai Air Show as well as the Bahrain Air Show, and show the aircraft off. And I know there were some deals made from some Middle Eastern states to purchase the aircraft, and I think they didn't necessarily materialize. But I know the Israelis were very interested for a while, and then they realized that in a country the size of Israel, long range isn't really required. But there was enough interest to do what they wanted to do with it, and they may purchase it in the future. But Japan was very interested, and they did end up buying.
Okay, excellent. All right, so the next question that we normally ask is probably a dumb one because it's why does it look the way it does? And I think for this particular aircraft, it's a distinct look. But, I mean, really, it comes down to you have these, you're going to need to tighten me up on the terminology, but you do have a fixed wing, like you said, and you have a tail, like an airplane. But then you have these big, what do you call those things? The pods or?
Nacelles.
Cells, okay. And those rotate anywhere from, you said, basically straight up and down. And that's what, 90? To straight horizontal, and that's 0. But then all of this can fold up too.
That's right.
Into this tight little bundle, and that's presumably so it can save room on the ship, or can it also be transported, like maybe in a C5 or something? Probably too big for that.
It's a little bit too tall with the tail. You'd have to take the tail off for a C5. But yes, so the nacelle, it houses both the engine and the gearboxes that allow for that movement up and down, and the reduction gearbox for the prop rotor. What's unique to the aircraft and goes into some of that design is the fact that we have an interconnecting drive shaft that I should mention. That if you were to have an engine failure, because I get asked this question all the time, well, if you have an engine failure, what happens? Because only one of those.
They just assume you like do somersaults and
you would if you were in helicopter mode, you'd immediately crash. If you didn't have an interconnecting drive shaft, which is one of the issues they had in the early days in the 50s and 60s trying to come up with this technology. So if I lose an engine, the other engine is connected through this interconnecting drive shaft through the gearboxes that it will drive the prop on the other side. So in airplane mode, it's almost a non-issue. You could shut an engine down and still do 200 knots of airspeed. It'll just limit you on power a little bit. Now, helicopter mode, because you really need that RPM to fly, it will affect you more with that power reduction because you're only going to get about 63% torque out of the engine. So you would have a noticeable power reduction, and you would need a runway if you were heavy at all or at altitude. But let's get back to what you asked me, and that is, why does it look the way it does? Yeah, so that nacelle moves around, and it can move from 0, which would be airplane, all the way back to 96 degrees. So it can actually move aft.
Wow.
And that's a really cool feature because it allows you to put that rotor system aft like that for stopping power as you're coming to slow down. And it also allows you to fly backwards.
And do you guys do that?
Yeah, and you can do that,
wow,
yes.
Okay.
So not only can you backwards taxi, so you can back out of a spot if you had to. From a hover, you could push the nacelles back and actually fly backwards. So that's possible. And helicopter talk here, you have a swash plate that moves the rotor system in any direction, so fully articulates that rotor system. So for hovering, so you could fly sideways, backwards, forward, X, Y, Z, and you can use the pedals to turn and yaw the aircraft around. So that's all very unique, and it's designed to allow us to do that. And one of the coolest things that we can do at an air show, you can go out and fly it, you can hover and fly, and people think that's really cool. But for the kids, they love to see the Transformer, right?
Of course.
And Hollywood has picked up on this, and the V-22 has been in Transformers movies as well.
All right.
And because it's a real-life Transformer. And essentially, we can go from any mode to any other mode within 90 seconds, and it's all electrically driven. I can select whatever configuration I want to on my multifunction display in the cockpit, and then just hold down a blade fold wing stow button, and it will put me in that configuration. And so that means I can completely stow the wing, fold the blades up to where the wing is in line with the fuselage and within the width of the landing gear.
Just to be clear, we're on the ground during this.
We are on the ground, yeah.
Sorry.
You would not want to do this in the air. And thank you, John.
I'm guessing there's inhibitors from doing that, but anyway, sorry.
You would not be able to do this in flight.
All right.
But that was designed in there to stow them up in the smallest package possible for shipboard operations.
Wow, very cool. Okay.
And it also assists for many of the maintenance functions to get into the mid-wing area. Has the APU, so the auxiliary power unit, and some gearboxes and generators, and it allows you to get in there a little easier. But that is for shipboard ops, and it's probably one of the coolest things to see it fully stow and then unstow and come back to come back to life. It can fly now. Yeah.
So what you're trying to say is your best act at an air show is on the ground?
Yeah, I am saying that. And it
is there a V-22 demo anywhere? I know the Harrier will do its demo and it'll go left and right and forward and back and up and down.
There absolutely is. So
I've never seen it.
I could put in a plug for the Miramar Air Show at the end of September. Come out and see it. You'll see the aircraft there.
The Fighter Pilot Podcast was there last year. I'm hoping to be there this year in 2019.
Absolutely. And many of the air shows that we go to, we do what's called the Level 3 demo, where you would see hover demonstration and also high-speed flight turns and conversion, and what we call conversion, which is going from airplane to helicopter, and then transition, which is helicopter to airplane.
Conversion and transition. Interesting. And as part of the MAGTAF demo, I think it also demonstrates the ability to carry the sling loads. At least I think it did last year.
Yeah, so they've done a variety of things there. In 2014, I actually led the Osprey division at the Miramar Air Show.
Oh, cool.
We had loads of Marines and came in and put them, landed them on the runway, and they ran off and did things, and pyrotechnics went off, and it was really quite cool. But it was a neat demonstration of what you can do. We came in after the Harriers went through and blew things up, and then we came in at about 240 knots in formation. Echelon did a brake maneuver, came in and landed on the runway. And then after dropping the Marines off, I wanted to show a demonstration of a couple different ways to take off. So we had the lead aircraft mine did a 60-degree stow, so that is a short takeoff.
Okay.
Nacelles a 60-degree, do a short run on the runway, take off. The next guy did a 75, which is a very short roll of maybe 50 to 100 feet, and then you're airborne. And then the last guy did just a vertical takeoff like a helicopter. So you would definitely get to see a different...
Very cool. And do the rotors turn the same direction, or are they counter-rotating?
They are counter-rotating, and that gives you anti-torque. That's important to any helicopter. It's why helicopters have a tail rotor. Or if they have two rotors, they'll always turn counterclockwise or counter to each other. So one clockwise, one counterclockwise to prevent that spinning motion.
Ideally, a lot of prop airplanes don't have that. So let me ask you then, when you deploy, is it two different engines or is it just the gearbox?
The engines are the same. So our engines are made by Rolls-Royce. It's the same family of engines that the C-130 uses and the P-3 would use. So it's an Allison built 1107 Charlie. If you're nerding out on engine stuff, ours provide quite a bit of horsepower, though, a little more than what the C-130's engines are rated to. 6150 shaft horsepower. So we have 12,300 shaft horsepower between the two, getting combined in the gearboxes. And the gearbox gives you that props turning it in different directions.
I see them fly up and down the bay sometimes in San Diego. I just hadn't looked closely enough, I guess, to see if they're counter-rotating or not. All right. How about armament? So you go into hot areas, like you said, but what are you guys carrying?
Yeah, so really it's just defensive stuff. So the current configuration with our Ospreys in the Marine Corps, and I'll speak to them specifically, is that we have a ramp-mounted weapon system. So a ramp gun off the tail. It's operated by our crew chief or an aerial observer if he's qualified as a gunner. And you can put different systems on there, the GAU-16, GAU-21, or the 240. And so that's a 50 caliber machine gun or a 7.62 millimeter machine gun that would be off of there. And because it's rear mounted, it's really going to help you out coming out of that zone by going in the zone, right? And again, we have to kind of go back to all Marine helicopters, even 53s, 46s that are assault support helicopters, don't really have forward firing ordnance, and there's a big distinction between that, and it kind of goes back to what I was talking about in my history, whether you want skids or
wheels, right?
Or wheels. Mm-hmm. So our skids are Cobras and our Hueys. They fire forward firing ordnance. Sure. They do a great job of it. We love them. The way we would go into an objective area, into a zone, and put Marines in there to do their work is we would have those skids in the overhead prosecuting targets ahead of us.
Right.
Or if we were going somewhere long range where we didn't have the ability to use skids because of our speed and range, we would use a jet platform.
Okay.
And very effectively, we used Harriers to do this on one of my deployments where we would line the deck with Ospreys. We would shoot all of our Ospreys on a running takeoff off the deck, and you could get a whole bunch off really quickly, 5-6 aircraft. And then right behind you, so we're en route. Right behind you, they fire the Harriers off, and then they beat us to the area, prosecute targets for us, get it cleaned up. We come in and do our thing. And that's kind of how it works. So we're going to land in this zone. We're going to drop the Marines off, and we might get shot at. And if we do, we can retaliate with our tail guns. But the reality is we're going to have that other platform that's better equipped for that to prosecute targets for us, and we're gonna boogie out of there and use our speed and our rate of climb to just get out of the envelope of small arms.
Okay. How about defensive systems, expendables, or?
Absolutely. So I will go back a little bit in history, and 99, 2000, thereabouts, they were actually talking about putting a nose gun on the Osprey, and it was in development. The program was canceled because of cost overruns and just some different things the Marine Corps wanted. But we were going to have a turreted nose gun on this thing.
Sort of like the Cobra?
Kind of like the Cobra, yeah. But they have a 20 millimeter, and this was going to be a 7.62, which really can't reach out and touch people. So that program was canceled. I think it was probably for the best. We do have a defensive weapon system, which is a belly gun we can deploy out through the hole that is usually used for the cargo hook. And it gives us a 360 sweep with 5 barrels, and it's a 7.62. It's operated with a modified PlayStation controller. No kidding, it looks like a PlayStation. And a screen by a Marine in the back. And it's a really cool weapon, but again, it's a 7.62 millimeter, so it just doesn't have that distance to get out there and touch someone. But it can shoot a lot of rounds really fast.
Sweet Pea, I'm envisioning Star Wars when the stormtroopers are closing on the Millennium Falcon. This little gun pops down and starts blasting them all. So something like that, huh?
You bet. Yeah, absolutely. Look it up. It was made by British Aerospace Engineering BAE, and it's a really cool weapon. But it's something that you have to deploy out after you take off and retract, or you'll land on it. And its range is a little bit limited. So. Expendables, we do have flares and chaff, and that's good for those threat environments.
Any type of electronic countermeasures?
No, just information given to the pilot so you can react.
All right. And if you guys, depending on where you're going, probably will carry a sidearm with you or something.
Absolutely. We do have things, and the Air Force has some systems on their aircraft, like Durkham, that are a little bit more electronic countermeasure, like you said, and the Marine Corps is purchasing those, and they're retrofitting some airframes for that.
Am I allowed to ask you what Durkham stands for? We can always edit this part.
Yeah, that's okay. They listeners can look it up, but it's a countermeasure system that can defeat infrared missiles.
Okay, excellent. Let's see, moving on. How about performance? Now, you already said that it can aerial refuel. So what can it do as far as speed, altitude? I'm guessing you don't pull a lot of G's in this thing normally, but or how far can you go?
Well, everybody likes to ask this question at air shows. So our V&E, so our max speed's 280 knots, and that's certainly they took it much faster in flight tests, over 340. But we're limited by that. Our Mach number is kind of low at a 0.48 Mach is what we're allowed to do. Up to 25,000 feet is what we can do per our limitations, and it's non-pressurized.
I was just about to ask that. So everyone's going to have to wear supplemental oxygen.
Yeah, you got to have oxygen. Now, early days, we're talking early 2000s, they were trying to give us a pressurized system For whatever reason, they decided not to continue with that program. The Marine Corps didn't. I wish we had it. It may be something that comes in the next generation of tilt-rotor, but we have to put on oxygen when we're going up high, above 10,000 feet. But yeah, 25,000 feet, 280 knots. So for those that don't speak in knots and speak miles per hour, it's about 322 miles an hour. Obviously, helicopter type stuff, you have some limitations.
Sure.
Above about 10,000 feet, it's going to be tough to land in an LZ on top of a mountain, but you can go a little higher. You could get up to 14,000, but you'd be pretty limited on what you could carry out of there.
Well,
and that's true of any helicopter.
Sure. And hopefully we're not doing a lot of armed combat up there. Okay. I should have asked you this before. Crew. So 2 pilots or a pilot and an NFO? I'm guessing 2 pilots.
2 pilots.
Okay. And then what do you got in the back?
Typically a crew of 4 with 2 pilots, a crew chief and an aerial observer / gunner in the back. But some missions only require just a crew chief, so a crew of 3 at a minimum. Typically for combat, you're going to be talking about a crew of 4. Now, the Air Force does have a flight engineer that sits in the middle seat, the jump seat in the cockpit, and they have more radios and things in there because they are a Special Operations Command platform. But typically we're talking a crew of 4.
Okay. Now, I'm guessing, again, fairly low G. That's not something you're normally doing in this thing?
Oh, yes. So again, fly-by-wire, so I get a vote. I get to say, hey, I want to do this, and the computer says, no, you don't, because you'll break me.
Right.
So a little over 4 Gs is what you could pull.
That's actually pretty good.
In the aircraft, which is plenty, right? And we have a really good reaction in the vertical plane. If you were to look at the elevator on the tail, it's a very big surface. So if you have some speed on, like if we were flying low altitude tactics and you were shot at, the first thing you want to do is get out of there, right? So we can really pull some Gs to get out of there. It's just sustaining it that you're not really going to be able to do.
Gotcha.
So if you were to compare it, an F-18 or something who has a lot of knots on 500 knots or something, he's got a lot of give with that speed to be able to sustain some Gs for some time.
Right.
Where 240 knots, you're going to bleed it down pretty quickly in a 4G turn to where it won't be sustainable anymore. So it's really just going to get you out of a pickle, and then you're going to be able to continue on.
What's the fastest and highest you've seen in this thing?
So I have gone to 25,000 feet, and I have absolutely gone to 280 knots. No doubt about it.
In case anyone's listening, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. All righty. Now, what would you say are some strengths and weaknesses of the V-22? And maybe we should take this question out because it's always, I mean, again, it can't go 500 knots. Well, of course it can't go 500 knots. That's not necessarily a weakness. But, I mean, regarding way it was built and what you have right now, if you could wave your magic checkbook wand, if you will, and say, I wish they would fund this or fix that, is there anything, and that's the weaknesses, I mean, is there anything you really love about it? Is there anything you wish you could fix if you had the money that they just haven't gotten around to?
Absolutely. So it's a great question, Jello, and it gets a little bit political into, what's the Marine Corps going to fund? Because I fly the Marine Corps variant, and the Air Force has their variant, and you always look at what they have, like, oh, that's really cool. They've got the Corvette. We got the basic model, and they got the upgrade model, right, or whatever. But it does really excel at that long range assault support for what we want it to do. So I've done a translant. I've flown across the Atlantic with this thing when I was at HMX, and it did phenomenally. If the aircraft is taken care of well, then all your systems like your ice protection will work really well, and you can fly in those environments that are just kind of hostile weather environments with ice or with heat or whatnot. So it really does that well. If there was one thing that I wanted more of, it's always fuel, right?
Of course.
And so the Marine Corps variant, our standard fuel load that we could fill up to with just the normal fuel tanks, and we're not talking about putting additional tanks into the cabin, which we can do.
Wow, okay.
Is 11,700 pounds of fuel.
Wow.
Which is a lot of fuel, right?
Well, but it's not as much as I would have expected. I mean, it's only slightly more than a F-18.
Right, and that's going to get you,
regular,
about, if you had to consider IFR type, so instrument flight rules with weather at your destination, it's going to get you about 800 miles.
Okay.
All right, without refueling or anything like that. So I would always like more fuel.
Sure.
So the Air Force, they have an extra fuel tank in there, so they can get 13.6
Okay.
on their fuel. And the Navy said, hey, we want more fuel. So their variant's going to have much more fuel, something like 6,000 or 7,000 pounds more when they finally get to the end. And then if you put in internal tanks in the middle to really get some long range, like when we did the Transland, I had 3 in there. And so we filled up to over 20,000 pounds initially prior to startup and taxi and everything. So I would like to have more fuel because it's blue water ops with the Navy. You're out on this ship in the middle of the ocean. They want you to go find another ship that's 300 miles away and then come back. And you know how tack ends are and just trying to find another ship at sea. You always kind of want a little more fuel.
Yeah.
And I wish we had that. We talked about the pressurization. Oh, that would make life really great because you could just go high all the time without having to put the mask on and be sucking on oxygen. And the issue with carrying passengers. So I can't take passengers above 13,000 feet without oxygen for them, and I don't have oxygen. I only have oxygen for all the crew. I have 7 stations on the aircraft. So if I've got 25 guys in the back, and we didn't really talk about that limitation. I've got 25 seats in the back, so you have 24 Marines or soldiers or passengers, plus a seat for your crew chief, and then you got 3 seats up in the cockpit. 2 are for the pilots, certainly, and then you have a jump seat you could have your other crew members sit in. But I can't take them very high, so that gives me some limitations on what I can do. I can go to 13,000, but only for a couple hours, and I got to bring it back down. And I'm on oxygen during that time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, speaking of that, why don't we talk about the load limit, if you will, as far as, so roughly 24 Marines or whoever, and what about otherwise weight? And how does that compare to what you used to fly on the Sea King?
Yeah, so it's a big upgrade from what I was flying in the late model CH-46. That aircraft in Vietnam was phenomenal in that it was very light and it was designed to carry 20 Marines in Vietnam. But then things changed and they increased the fuel tanks on the CH-46 to give it more range because it was very range limited in the Vietnam era. It was designed for short trips, and so you doubled the size of the fuel tank. Well, that means your capacity.
That's right. It's a trade-off.
Yeah, your airframe got much heavier.
Yeah.
And the years that I was flying it, 2007, 2011, you're on a really good day, you'd have about 7,000 pound useful load on a CH-46. Well, over to the Osprey now. Your takeoff limitation depends on what kind of takeoff you're going to do.
Okay. Because
I can be sort of like an airplane for takeoff and use a runway, or I can do a vertical takeoff. So vertical takeoff, 52,600 pounds is your limit.
Of total weight.
Of total weight.
All right.
Airframe basic weight's roughly 36,000 pounds, a little bit less on most airframes. So you've got about 21,000 pounds to work with for a vertical takeoff. Now, if I go to a rolling takeoff where I'm using a runway, I could go 57,000, and then our NATOPS just open that window, that envelope up to we're at an alternate max gross weight of 60,500 pounds, which you used to only be able to achieve in the air. So you go up and take off heavy, you could take some more gas and get even heavier. But now we can take off from a runway at over 60,000 pounds.
Wow.
So we're talking 25,000 pounds of weight, useful load, potentially that I can tap into. So it's tremendously more.
Gotcha.
And to talk to passengers real quick, the Air Force frequently takes their seats out. So that not only reduces airframe weight, but it means they can stack more guys in there and have them sit on the floor.
Oh, really?
And they clip in to the floor, so it's not uncommon for them to take 32 or 36 passengers.
Okay. All right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, how about we're on to notoriety. Now, you already mentioned Transformers. I haven't watched any of those, but that sounds about right. I'm trying to think where I've seen it, and I can't come up with any, but of course I follow, military aviation. Where else would the listener who maybe doesn't know what we're talking about have seen the Osprey either in the news or in Hollywood?
Oh, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about Hollywood. What's at the cutting edge of getting cool military technology and seeing what we're doing in the military and then taking it and transforming it and making it really fun is really in video games. So those video gamers out there, they know that they've seen this in the various video games. And I'm not a big video gamer, but I know there's different Call of Duty, and there's there's inspiration from Osprey and from Tilt-rotor technology into these wacky things, and you see it in Hollywood too. But the Osprey is in Battle LA. It's in Transformers. One of the what was the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies where he was the robot
Terminator?
I'm sorry. One of the Terminators features an Osprey, and they jump out of an Osprey and into the water and go join up with a submarine.
Oh, yeah. That was number like 4 or 5. I lost track.
I think Christian Bale was in that one or something. So, the Osprey's in there, and then other movies. If you watch Avatar, they've taken this kind of idea.
Right.
It's got this thing with ducted fans flying around, taking off vertically and flying fast. And it's just that idea is all over the place in there. And then, the Osprey is certainly, we talked a little bit about it from around the year 2000, had some crashes that, really got everybody thinking, oh my goodness, what is this thing? And is this thing safe? And so the good press from Hollywood and this cool thing in video games, and then there's the reality, which, you have, anytime you have a crash, everybody questions, is the thing safe? And we had a couple in 2000 out in Arizona. But since then, what I would say is there were some issues in testing the aircraft, just like any airplane, where you have a lot of issues. And we worked through those and figured out where there were weaknesses in either the software or the hardware, or whatever we were doing, the training for the pilots. And it's really been ironed out. And the truth is, and even though there are skeptics out there, the truth is the Osprey is one of the safest aircraft in naval aviation, believe it or not, with the fewest crashes and deaths over the course of its history.
Yeah. Amazing. I take it the pilots don't have ejection seats, right? Just a regular helicopter aircraft type seat.
That is absolutely correct. Because
you would want to bail and leave your 2 crewmen back there.
Any aircraft that carries passengers for a living, you're going to find that, and you know that in your job. And C-130s, they have parachutes on C-130s, but they don't have ejection seats. Right. So I guess if you saw those guys running out the back with their parachute on, I'd be worried. Yeah. And the same is for us. We do not fly with parachute, and we do not have ejection seats. So there is a lot of incentive to fly that thing all the way down.
Like you own it.
And get everybody down safely.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Sweet Pea, we're just about done. Any good sea stories from your 1,600 hours, multiple deployments in the V-22? The MV-22, I get this right, you want to share with us today?
Well, I've had a phenomenal career in the aircraft and a lot of great wins. And so I'll leave you with some fun from, my time at HMX was a really, really fun time in flying the aircraft. And there is nothing better in the world than having airspace to yourself, like a TFR, presidential TFR, and flying at low altitude, high speed across New York City, Chicago, or LAX. And I guess without incriminating myself too badly, but I was able to do a lift where we were coming out of Dodger Stadium's parking lot in LA.
Whoa.
And so that's where the pickup point was, and we're returning back to LAX.
LAX, okay.
LAX specifically. Air Force One is over there. And we've got to pick them up, and I've got to shoot across town, but the way things work is you got to be able to get there, and we're carrying the staff and the press and all the kind of entourage that travels with a VIP on our aircraft, and we take off last, but we have to land first and be shut down with everybody disembarked before POTUS gets there. And that's a big challenge. So we have to leverage the speed of the aircraft and do that. And it was a challenge everywhere we went. New York, Chicago, LA, if we were in Minnesota, if we were in Florida, wherever we were. Because usually the distance was kind of short. But in LA, it was really fun. We came in, and typically they're shutting the airport down. So LAX, in this case, they've got 4 runways all going the same direction parallel. They had the western runways or south runways open, and they're bringing airliners in, and they closed down. Well, if you were looking, so the eastern runways are closed down for us to come in and do our thing with POTUS. And so I'm booming across there, and my waypoint just happened to be in the center, and that's kind of where we were going, was the far end by the beach of LAX on inboard, so kind of the center of the runway. And I'm just going as fast as I can at this. And they said, well, the tower asked me, do you have the Airbus off your left side? I go, I'm flying formation off this Airbus who's coming into land.
Oh, geez.
And I'm a little bit off. I got to make a turn, and I'm kind of showing him the belly. That was really fun. And then, of course, going into Chicago, you always deal with sometimes controllers don't know how to handle you because they think you're a helicopter and you're coming in. I remember Chicago O'Hare asked us, hey, keep best forward speed because they're working us in with airliners. I said, okay, best forward speed, and I'm doing 270 knots. That airliner is on final. He's not doing 270 anymore. And I'm passing, a 737 off the right, and, over here there's an Airbus. And then the controller got it, and he said, okay, can you maintain 180 for me? So we could kind of match
after
up.
the controller listens to this episode, then he or she will understand a little better. But that's awesome. So just explaining briefly, because I do spend a lot of this podcast talking about acronyms. So anywhere the president or vice president flies is a temporary flight restriction, right? A TFR.
That's right.
So that's so that Fred and Joe and their little Cessnas and Bonanzas don't just go bebopping around too close to the big guys.
That's very right. And that keeps all the little guys out there from being in the way or looky-loos or anybody with malintention.
Yeah, well, that's important too. And that's really how you separate, right, them, although sometimes you do get the knucklehead who doesn't know it, and that's on them, and they can lose their certifications and all that. And then POTUS, simply the President of the United States. Awesome. All right, buddy. Well, what's the future hold for you? I mean, you're still active duty. Thank you very much.
Yeah, appreciate that. Well, it's a bright future. We're in a community that's growing and is still fairly young. I was selected to lieutenant colonel in January of this year. So what's next for me?
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Command, hopefully. So put in for that. We'll wait maybe later this year, towards the end of the year, I'll find out if going to command. For the moment, keep flying as long as possible. Stay in the squadron and fly. Maybe get a command, and then planning to retire and moving on to something else in aviation after 20 years. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll have to keep in touch with you and see how that goes. Of course, you have an active family life at home, right? You got a bunch of boys like I do. We need to get our families together.
I think we should. Yeah, I've got four boys. Wow. Bless my wife.
She's a single mom with 5 boys, really, right?
That's really how it is. And, you got to give them credit with all the deployments that we do in the military and everything, that all the away time on trips and training and whatnot. They're really holding down that fort. And I've got 4 of them. I got a 3-month-old that's my youngest. So I'm a very busy dad when I go home because my wife just needs a break.
Oh, man, that's great. Are you in a deploying squadron now?
I am. So we're a reserve squadron, but we do deploy. We did a deployment for the Special Purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force Crisis Response Africa. In 2017, the unit did that, and they are scheduled to go back out again in 2021. So because it's a reserve squadron, the time between deployments is a little bit longer, but they are right there in the rotation, giving that active component a break. And the next unit I go to will probably be doing the same thing.
How many total deployments have you done?
So I've done 3. I got a little bit of a break when I did the transition for the Osprey, and then at HMX, I was on the road a lot, but not deploying in a traditional sense. But I did the 15th MEU twice and the 13th MEU Marine Expeditionary Unit once on USS Peleliu for 2 deployments, and which is no longer active. It's been decommissioned, and then the USS Boxer.
So you had some Navy appreciation. Were those roughly 6-month deployments or longer?
6, 7, and 8 months respectively, with the full workup period of about 6 to 7 months of building up and training with the Navy prior to going out on those deployments. So, as a Marine, as a captain, I had more than 2 years of at-sea time, which was quite a bit of at-sea time for a Marine officer. It's a company grade, and I felt pretty good about that, and I was good. I didn't need more necessarily.
Awesome. All right, and you know the deal, Sweet Pea. What is the deal with that call sign? So I don't know. I'm guessing you didn't give it to yourself, but certainly could be worse. How did someone come up with Sweet Pea for Josh Smith?
Well, if any of your listeners have been involved in marine aviation and have gone to the weapons tactics course or know anything about that course out in Yuma, they may have heard of this thing called the shredder board. And it was developed by a person with a call sign, Shredder, who was my CO on my first deployment. And Shredder, he's a great guy, very tactical CO. So he had been a department head out there teaching at the weapons tactics instructor course for the Marine Corps. And, he expected a lot out of us. And I was a schedule writer for him on a MEU deployment. So on the ship, there's a lot of moving pieces. You have 4 different type of aircraft that belong to the squadron, and you're dealing with deck cycles and all this stuff going on, to where it's just a nightmare when you're trying to write that schedule. Like you got to find so many pieces of information, put this puzzle together, and get it signed by 4 different people. The last one being the CO, and they all have to be in agreement that this is the right thing to do for the next day. And sometimes you'd start working on this thing at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and you wouldn't be done until 2200 at night, sometimes much later for guys. And I have utmost sympathy for them, because it was a tough job. First 2 years in the squadron, I did that. Anyway, so fast forward, we're on deployment, and we get to the K-Court, and Shredder, who, very demanding guy, but great guy, very tactically proficient, he gets up, and I have no idea what my call sign is going to be, because all kinds of silly stuff's been thrown out there. But he says, this guy embodied the spirit of some of these great guys that we had in the past, and every good squadron needs a Sweet Pea. And so I don't know what you're talking about, but I had to get smart on it, because he said, hey, so this guy's always really happy when he brings me the schedule. He's got a smile on his face. He helps everyone out, and he's the right guy to get this call sign. So my call sign is a little bit of a memorial, which is a lot on my shoulders to carry that.
Okay.
We had a Marine aviator named Sweet Pea Aubin, who the initial push into Iraq in 2003 crashed in a CH-46, died. But he was this guy that would give you the shirt off his back, right? Yeah. And to this day, at the weapons and tactics course, which goes twice a year in Yuma, there is an award, the Sweet Pea Aubin Award, that is given to the guy in the class that is just the team player that helps everybody out, that has the best attitude and everything. And so to be named after that guy, I think, is a lot on my shoulders. I've tried to wear it well. And also was mentioned Sweet Pea Sturdivant, who had been a CO at the squadron, my first squadron as well, and later became commanding general of the wing. Huh. And really great man as well. So that's the serious side, and the not so serious side of it, as call signs kind of, evolve, over time. But I really appreciate that I was given that honor, I guess, of being Sweet Pea and carrying that legacy on. But
well, that is a tall order to fill.
It is a really tall order. As I transitioned to the Osprey, learned a lot. So, and we're really going a different direction here. But one thing that we did a lot when we flew helicopters is sometimes you land and like guys got to go out and they got to take a leak once in a while, So you do what
nature calls.
Yeah, you do what you call the stub wing check. You get out there and you kind of go to the back of the helicopter and you do your business because you've been flying for a few hours and you gotta go. So here I am as a junior Osprey guy. I'm pretty fresh out of school. I'm a captain. I've got a lot of experience overall, but not a lot in the aircraft. And I get out there, and people told me, don't do that. You got to get away from the Osprey because the downwash is pretty significant, right? And we're out in the desert in California, a place called Holtville. It had a really strong wind out there that day. I think it was gusting like 30 knots, really strong wind. So I'm thinking, well, I could go really far away, but if anyone has relieved themselves, in a really windy situation, it just can be a mess. So I'm thinking I can hide kind of behind the aircraft here and do this. And that was a really bad idea.
Should we suffice to say it didn't end well?
It did not end well.
Okay.
And the rotor wash from, stirring up all this air plus the wind made this go all over. And I was at the time a flight line OIC, so I was the officer in charge of the flight line or power line shop, which is your engine mechanics and your crew chiefs that are there, and they are watching this go down and just laughing at me. And I remember getting back in, and they didn't let me live it down either. They were like,
"Of course,
sir, this is why they call you Sweet Pea, because you just sweet peed all over yourself." And it was true. It was embarrassing and a pretty messy situation. The wind caught that.
All right.
I was wearing it for the rest of the flight.
Well, so just to be accurate, when we list you on this episode, is it Sweet PEA or PEE?
Accurately, it is PEA.
All right.
But my crew chiefs that worked for me certainly had a lot of fun with that for a few years while I was in that squadron.
No doubt.
Yeah.
I'm sure. All right, well, Lieutenant Colonel Select Josh Smith, Sweet Pea, I want to thank you for your 16 years of service to this country and for raising a wonderful family and for your 3 deployments and for spending an hour with us today talking about the V-22. I know the listener appreciated it. I certainly learned a lot. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Jello. It's been great.
Awesome. All right, let's get out of here.
All right, Jello. Well, dude, love hearing Sweet Pea there in the interview. And I got to admit, I think that to hover is truly divine. So what did you think?
Well, first off, I wondered about Sweet Pea's war face because as a Marine, he's supposed to be a killer, and he seems like a pretty nice guy, family dude. And anyway, thanks again, Josh Smith, for coming on the show, being a good sport. And I really enjoyed that. I learned a lot about the MV-22. I didn't realize it'd been around so long. I still think of it as relatively new.
You know what? And great point that you guys kind of fleshed out in the interview there, because that program, there was a lot of stop and start drama of the program itself. And the real casualty of it is they didn't explore the flight envelope very well. So when he talked about its FOC or IOC was kind of initial operational capability, for operational capability, it was about 2007, right? Is that what he said?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in there?
I think so.
Yeah, and then, but they had just kind of basically just gleaned the flight qualities. They just started to learn the flight qualities. So I think once it went fully operational, that's when they actually continued to explore. And it was kind of a test bed even in the beginning until I think the full realization is probably now. So totally get it that people, haven't really seen it a lot until now, at least me.
Well, and it's still coming into focus, if you will.
Yeah.
Certainly that is the case with the CMV for the Navy. So
absolutely.
Yep. It's got a rosy future ahead. Well, that's cool. I really enjoyed that interview on the Osprey, and we do have some new terms, POTUS and CASEVAC and a few others. We'll throw those on the glossary, as we always do. And do me a favor, by the way, if you use the glossary, let me know, because before we hit record here, Sunshine and I were talking about it. Does anyone really use that? So if you do, let us know, and we'll keep it going for you. So. All right.
Nice.
Well, let's see. Sunshine, we've got some patrons who are supporting us, I want to mention, and we've upped the level now, so we're only talking about strike leads and above. Let me tell you who they are. That's Jesse Rudd, Tim William, Jamie Ledbetter, Austin Wright, and Wadha Al-Talji. And if you remember that name, he actually stepped up from a lower level before.
Yeah.
Sunshine, who do we have for new mission commanders?
Yeah, I think I mispronounced Wada's name earlier in an episode, so thank you for stepping up there. And new mission commanders, we have Daniel Miller, Lindsay Dalton, and Steve Pritchard. So thank you for that. And how about air bosses, Jello?
Air bosses, Andrew Fergala and Bill Horvath. Now, Bill Horvath, by the way, I've mentioned his name on this show a few times.
Oh, yeah,
he was our very first air boss ever last year. He stepped up for a month or two and then stepped down a little bit. And we get it, folks. You've got other things to do. That's a pretty big commitment. We certainly do appreciate it, and it helps keep the lights on for the show. But big thanks to Bill for stepping back up. And everyone at the mission commander and above level gets a debrief. And I just want to tell you, Sunshine, today I had a chance to speak with Lindsay, I'm not sure how she pronounces it.
Yeah.
But a nice young lady down in Texas.
Oh, okay.
She was in the Air Force for a while, now works on F-16s on the avionics, and has hopes of getting back into the Air Force as a pilot once she finishes her college and maybe flying F-16s. So we're helping out that next generation of up-and-coming aviators.
Yeah, best of luck, Lindsay. That's a great strategy you got going.
For sure. All right, Sunshine. Well, we're about out of time. I want to remind the listeners that the views expressed in this presentation are the personal views of the hosts and our guest and do not necessarily represent the position of the Department of Defense or its components. So I think that'll do it for this week, Sunshine. What else do you got before we head out?
Nothing at all, Jello. Just it was a great interview. Look forward to next episode. And what do we always say?
Let's get out of here.
All right. See you.
You've been listening to the Fighter Pilot Podcast, brought to you by BVR Productions. Got a question for the show? Send an email to questions@fighterpilotpodcast.com or leave a message on our listener line at 877-MACH-101. That's 877-622-4101. Check us out at our website, fighterpilotpodcast.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. For exclusive Fighter Pilot Podcast content, check out our Patreon page. Please like, follow, and subscribe to the show. And don't forget to share us with your network. Thanks for listening.